Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to run through what to do when you receive an expense report from a subrecipient, specifically covering how to review the expense report, input it into the finance tracker, and then upload it to the SharePoint properly before, in the case of reimbursement, inputting the information into EBS, or in the case of an advancement, just simply putting it on the SharePoint. So let's look at an example expense report. We have the three components, the expense summary report here, the itemized invoice report, and the payroll report, all three reports. Let's first go to the expense summary report. Here we have a fictitious program called Cook County Feed the Horses program, very famous program. Subrecipient address is obviously on Ney Avenue. We see that they have an approved budget of $1 million, split evenly between personnel, contractual services, supplies, materials, and other. Because this is, pretend their first report, the activity balance is the same as the approved budget. And we see here that they've incurred expenses in the month of July for $25,000 across the board, amounting to $100,000, which would leave their residual balance from $250,000 to $225,000 across the board, leaving them with $1 million minus $100,000, $900,000. We see here we have the signature, the date listed, and then we've also, at this point, even got the Cook County approvals with all the information here, the 2 layers of approval. And then we also put in the date that this will eventually be submitted for EBS if this is a reimbursement. And we see here it is designated as a reimbursement to the REM, the program number, and the number reimbursement. Now, let me just quickly, I want to check to make sure that these amounts are equal to those reflected on the 2 sub-reports, the itemized invoice report and the payroll report. So we see here, again, contractual services, $25,000, supplies and materials, $25,000, other, $25,000. I'm going to go to the itemized invoice report. And I see we have 2 contractual services, Horse Feeders Inc. and Horse Yum Yums and Sons. And I see that the invoice amount is $15,000 and $10,000. That's $25,000. That's consistent with the expense summary report. Then I see there are 2 supplies and materials categories. And I see there's one here for $12,500 and the requested amount is $12,500. Here I see that there's actually an invoice amount for $15,000, but they're only requesting $12,500. They probably didn't use the full cost. They only applied a certain amount of the pencils for horses to this program. And so $12,500, $12,500. The total cost for supplies and materials is $25,000. That also is consistent with the expense summary report. And then finally, the other categories, we see we have 2 marketing expenses, pony marketers and Facebook ads for ponies, $14,000 and $11,000, also $25,000. So we see here we have a good check on these 3 amounts, expended amounts, contractual services, supplies and materials, and other, all individually equaling $25,000. Now let me just make sure that the personnel cost of $25,000 is also true. I'm going to go to the payroll report. I see here Nene McPherson, Stallion Steed, right? All of these different titles listed. I see the gross wages paid for pay period for each of them, the proportional amounts that should be applied. 25% of $20,000 is $5,000. 50% of $10,000 for each of them is also $5,000. All of those $5,000 across the board equals $25,000. Signatures are here. Everything looks good. All looks up to snuff. I should also add here, when I'm looking at the itemized invoice report as well, I see all the dates are for the period, the incurrence period covered in July. That looks good to me. And so we see here the expense summary report is good to go. Now I'm going to go to the finance tracker to input this information into the finance tracker. Some people who are a little bit more diligent may want to put in the individual line items on the itemized invoice report and the payroll report. But just one point I want to emphasize at the end of this ultimately is that the finance tracker really can just capture the expense summary report details. And that way it also does not need to be too arduous or burdensome. It could be very quick. So let's go to the expense summary report, the finance tracker. As we see here, we have total award, Cook County costs for $1 million, subrecipient A gets $3 million, though again, the expense summary report was only for one fiscal year, 2022. So this is $3 million over 3 years. So $1 million per year. Same for all the other subrecipients. And then you see it's broken out per month. and everything is added up here. Where you're only going to do work in this sheet, anything that will be changed is really in the expense recording sheet. So here we just got us a invoice from subrecipient A. I'm going to copy this down because there are 4 invoices. Expense coverage period was for July. And I'm going to again copy this down for all 4. Date expense submitted was, I believe, the 14th. So I'm going to put that here as well. For all of these, fiscal year package submitted, we said FY22. Move this down. Fiscal quarter, the expenses submitted. This is July, and you'll see here a note that says this is for a calendar year because this pertains to treasury reporting, and if that's relevant, and that's Q3. Date of expenses. This, again, you can just put the period of July because it's inclusive of a total period and multiple expenses if you're doing the expense summary route. And then if you remember, we have the personnel costs, we have the supplies and materials, we have contractual services, and we have the other category. You could put in details here. This is just describing personnel helping horses be fed. And then expense amount, we remember it was $25,000 across the board. Put that in. This was all a reimbursement. So this was against a reimbursement. And then the county number, if you remember, we put in the format which shows what number invoice it is. And then again, that's something that will be applied here. And then none of these were capital expenditure, so I'm just going to put no. And we basically finished the finance tracker. That's basically all you have to do. And what I'll show you is that, again, all the work is done here, but it will automatically populate this sheet. I now know that in July, we've incurred $100,000 for subrecipient A. This is their residual balance. And if we go to the admin summary page, this also gives you details. Again, it automatically populates to understand what costs have been expended, how they've been broken out by different categories. This is actually going to show you across all subrecipients. So it will give you some interesting data around where costs are being incurred significantly relative to others. Gives you breakout of capital expenditures versus not, and reimbursed versus not. This is particularly important for understanding an advance drawdown, to understand whether an advance was drawn down. Okay. Now let's put this on. After we check this and everything's okay, we put the 2 signatures from, of course, the program lead, Horsey McNane, and the famous department fiscal lead, Mahorsi Isaponi, and we get those signatures, and then we'll put them on the SharePoint. We pretended that this was a BED program, NTXXX tutorial, feed the horses. I'm going to go to program finances. This is where my finance tracker exists. I'm then going to go to invoices. I'm going to go to subrecipient A invoices, July, because we said this was July. And this is the expense reports. And of course, backup invoice documents should be incorporated here. And then the expense reports, I'll upload into here. And this is where they'll ultimately reside. And when you have this residing here, I would copy this link, go back to the finance tracker, and put in relevant folder, program finances NTXX, maybe a hyperlink here, copy this down. And then if you have invoice documents, again, hyperlink here, the page where you found it. If you have proof of payment documents as well, maybe separately, put in the hyperlink, the doc here, and then put in the page number. Again, this is really helpful for future auditor references. You can provide this entire deck to a prospective auditor, a single auditor, for example, who will then know exactly where to find where these expenses were captured. And then if it's a reimbursement and you know it's been paid, you can say, yes, it's been paid. I'll just do this across the board. I know that the fiscal year was paid was FY22. And this will be relevant in a treasury reporting context. Again, let's say it was paid in Q3 as well. And then ultimately this will below will populate as well. You see that this accounts for obligations versus expenditures when things were actually out the door and paid. This is only relevant in some programs, so don't have to worry too much about this. But again, for Treasury reporting, this is helpful, and you can see the breakdown. This automatically populates based on everything happening in this sheet. Now, one thing I want to show just really quickly is let's pretend that a subrecipient received an advance. And let's say they submitted a similar expense report. Let's just pretend the same one received an advance after July in the amount of $500,000. So they got a 50% advance against their fiscal year allocation, $500,000. Let's pretend you see here their activity balance is actually less than their approved budget because, again, they incurred $25,000 across the board in their last expense summary report. That's why it looks like this. This is the amount of money that's left in each category, 225, 225, 225, 225. Let's say they expended the same amount across each category again. So it's going to be for 100,000. You'll see the residual will be 225 minus 25, 200,000 across the board, leaving them 800,000. But this 100,000 was incurred against their advance. That's why you see here 500,000 of total advances funds provided to date, 100,000 incurred against that advance, leaving them a balance of $400,000. The difference here will be that, again, you'll do all of the same things. I'm just going to copy these really quickly, just for illustration purposes. You'll do all of the same things. Of course, this is now August. These are for costs in August. And so I'll do this. This will be submitted, I think it was 9/14 in this example. So I'll just change these. This was also technically Q3. And let's just pretend this was 8/1, 8/30. Again, copying it here. Here, this was in advance. And this is helpful, again, to know the dollars that were incurred against an advance. So we have the appropriate nomenclature. And that way, when anyone asks how much funds were incurred against an advance or what the residual balance is, we know how much has been incurred against an original advance. And then you follow the same procedures here. That is a walkthrough of the finance tracker and how you deal with expenses and incorporating them within the finance tracker. And again, of course, if this is a reimbursement, you would incorporate it within the SharePoint as we've seen in the SharePoint folder here for the appropriate month. And then you can incorporate the information into EBS to initiate payment to be reimbursed. If it's an advancement expense summary report, you just put it into the appropriate folder, and there's nothing else that is needed. For reference, if anyone has a question, you can always reach out to me, Hillel Gross, at hgross@guidehouse.com. And then as well, I would say if anyone wants to review this tutorial in the future or see the documents that were used for this tutorial, you can go to the ARPA Program Management folder, Tools and Templates, Fiscal Management Documents, number 9, and then you can see here the tutorial folder. Thank you and have a great day.